learned early that silence could be safer than words. In a small Midwestern town where winters were long and people spoke plainly, Evan grew up in a house where raised voices meant doors slammed and apologies never came. When his father was angry, the air itself felt sharp, and when his mother was hurt, she disappeared into chores, folding laundry with stiff hands and a face that said nothing. Evan watched, absorbed, and adapted. By the time he reached adulthood, quiet had become his shield. When pain came, his mouth closed, his shoulders tightened, and he retreated inward, not because he didn't feel deeply, but because he felt too much. As an adult in Chicago, Evan worked as a data analyst, a job that rewarded focus and calm. His coworkers admired his steady nature. He never raised his voice, never complained, and always delivered on time. What they didn't see was how carefully he rationed his energy, how each small conflict echoed louder inside him than anyone guessed. When a colleague took credit for his work, Evan didn't confront him. He simply went quiet, answering emails with fewer words, avoiding eye contact in meetings. Inside, his thoughts raced, replaying the moment again and again, searching for what he could have done differently. The psychology behind his silence was simple but heavy. Going quiet gave him control. Words, once released, could be twisted or used against him. Silence kept him safe from escalation, from saying something he might regret, from revealing how vulnerable he truly felt. Yet silence also carried a cost. It built walls where bridges might have stood, and it left others guessing, often assuming indifference where there was actually pain. That misunderstanding followed him into his personal life. When Evan met Maya at a friend's barbecue, she was drawn to his gentleness. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words were thoughtful. Maya was expressive, the kind of person who processed emotions out loud. At first, their differences felt complementary. She brought warmth and movement into his quiet world, and he brought steadiness into hers. But when conflicts arose, old patterns emerged. The first time Maya criticized him for canceling plans to work late, Evan felt that familiar tightening in his chest. He understood her disappointment, but the sting of feeling like he'd failed her sent him inward. Instead of explaining, he nodded, said he was sorry, and grew distant. Maya noticed immediately. His replies became short, his smile forced. She asked what was wrong, and he said nothing, believing that space would let the hurt pass. For Maya, his silence felt like abandonment. She grew anxious, filling the quiet with questions, trying to pull him back. For Evan, the pressure made him retreat further. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was that caring hurt too much. His mind told him that if he stayed quiet long enough, the storm would pass without causing damage. What he didn't realize was that the silence itself was becoming the storm. The breaking point came one evening when Maya, exhausted and close to tears, asked him if he even wanted to be with her. The question pierced through his defenses. He saw, perhaps for the first time, that his quiet was not neutral. It was communicating something he never intended. He didn't suddenly find the perfect words, but he did something small and brave. He admitted that when he was hurt, he shut down because he was afraid of making things worse. The words came out slowly, unevenly, but they were honest. Maya listened, and in that moment, kindness changed the direction of both their lives. She didn't demand that he become someone else overnight. She didn't accuse him of being cold. Instead, she acknowledged his pain and told him she wanted to understand it. That simple act of kindness, of meeting silence with patience rather than anger, cracked open a door Evan had kept closed for years. It didn't fix everything, but it planted a seed, one that would grow with time, care, and continued understanding. The days that followed were awkward but sincere. Evan began to notice the moments when he felt himself pulling inward, the subtle signs his body gave him before he went quiet. His jaw would tighten, his breathing shallow. Instead of disappearing into silence completely, he practiced naming the feeling, even if only in a sentence. "I'm hurt, but I don't know how to talk about it yet," he would say. For him, that was enormous progress. From a psychological standpoint, people like Evan often learned early that expressing pain led to more pain. Silence became a coping mechanism, a way to self-soothe and regain control. What they need is not pressure to speak, but safety to do so. Maya intuitively understood this. She gave him time without withdrawing her care. When he was quiet, she stayed present, showing through actions that he was not alone. Their relationship became a quiet lesson in kindness. Maya learned not to take his silence personally, and Evan learned that being heard didn't always lead to conflict. Slowly, he began to trust that his feelings could exist in the open without causing harm. He started therapy, encouraged gently by Maya, and there he learned language for emotions he had never named. Hurt, fear, shame, and grief were no longer vague weights but recognizable experiences he could work through. At work, he also began to change. When a project was mishandled and he was blamed unfairly, he felt the familiar urge to withdraw. This time, he paused. He reminded himself that speaking up was not the same as starting a fight. With a calm voice and prepared notes, he clarified his role and contributions. The conversation was uncomfortable, but it ended with understanding and respect. That day, Evan realized that silence had protected him once, but it no longer had to define him. The kindness he received began to flow outward. Evan became more attuned to quiet people around him, the ones who nodded and smiled but said little when things went wrong. He noticed how often their silence was misread. Instead of pushing them to talk or ignoring them, he offered patience. A simple, "I'm here when you're ready," became his way of passing on what he had learned. In the end, Evan didn't stop being a quiet person. Silence was still part of who he was, and it still had value. The difference was that it was no longer the only way he knew how to survive pain. Through kindness, both given and received, he learned that going quiet when hurt was not a flaw, but a signal. And when that signal was met with understanding instead of judgment, healing became possible, not all at once, but steadily, gently, and for good.